Oh, hi, welcome. So we're just getting started here. So for those of you just joining us, ooh, look at we look so much better. Hello. Welcome. We are excited to chat with you tonight. This is the fabulous Dr. Heather Ann Moody.
Hello.
Taylor's on here. Taylor Fink. Hi, Taylor. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're excited to have you. And then up here it tells you how many people have joined. So you know how many people are watching. It's really exciting.
This is very exciting.
Yes. Welcome, welcome. We're excited to have you all. Hello.
I like the little hand waves.
Yeah, you can wave back too if you really want to.
Fun.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So we're going to start by I'm going to introduce the amazing Dr. Heather Ann Moody, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about what she does when she goes into classrooms and talks to teachers, and we'll share our journey together of what we've kind of done together, okay? So hopefully that sounds good, and we're excited to have you all here.
Welcome, welcome. Pretty exciting.
It is.
It's fun. I like to see all the little people pop up.
I know. But then you have, like, don't really know what they look like.
That's okay, but their little emojis are fun to look at.
Yeah, they are.
Oh, hello.
Hello. So this is Dr. Heather Ann Moody's first time on a live chat, so it's very exciting. She doesn't know Instagram that well, so this is all very new to her. So give her patience, but we'll walk her through it.
I might be like very distracted, like
With
a
all
dog
the
with
questions.
squirrels. I'll be like, ooh, what's that?
Yes. Yeah. Especially when people start asking questions. Like
It'll be exciting.
It's a lot. It's great. All right. So do you want to share a little bit about your journey, where you are today? Okay.
Do you want me to introduce myself?
Should I introduce you?
It's okay. I can.
I introduced you twice already. Okay.
Well, my background.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We got this. We're all good. So I'm, as Tasha mentioned, Dr. Heather Ann Moody. I teach at UW Eau Claire. I've been there for, I think this is my 14th year teaching in American Indian Studies, and I am an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. So it's just for those who are familiar with Wisconsin, because I'm not sure where you're all from. It's kind of about 45 minutes from Eau Claire is where our tribal headquarters are. So we don't have a reservation, but we're one of the 11 federally recognized tribes in the state of Wisconsin. So my background is that my doctorate's in education, so I'm an educator as well, but my specialty is focused on Act 31, which is a requirement in Wisconsin that all students K through 12 need to understand what tribal sovereignty is, what treaty rights are, history and culture of our federally recognized tribes. So that is not frequently done in the state of Wisconsin, throughout Wisconsin, but part of what I do outside of the university is to work with teachers like Tasha on how to get American Indian content into their classrooms. So a lot of people automatically put it in social studies or history, and I have worked with English teachers as well, but doing something in art is really important, and you can get a lot of information about sovereignty, about treaty rights, and history and culture through art as well. So I am always happy to work with any teacher who wants me to work with them, and we'll figure it out. And what I've discovered is that there's no one cookie cutter way to do things. So working one-on-one with teachers, I prefer, because then we can customize everything to your classroom, or give you ideas of how to work with other people perhaps, or other departments, other teachers in your school. How can we work together to do a lot of these things as well?
Can everyone hear us out there okay? We just want to make sure everyone can hear. So one of the ways we originally got connected was her children go to my school.
One of them's here.
Yes, one of them is our back tech aide right now, because we need those. And I met them through teachers and friends, and when she told me what she did, I was like, oh my goodness, I need your help, because prior to meeting her, I was too scared to teach anything in regards to Native American studies, because I was too afraid to offend anyone or to do it incorrectly, and I wasn't sure how to go about it at all. So in that regards, I said, hey, how can I do this and make it meaningful and making it helpful to students? So then we kind of, I don't know how we originally...
I don't know, I think we just started, you said, hey, can you help me with this? And I said, sure, I don't know how to do any art because I draw figures, and then you didn't like that. But
We had to talk about how
We had to
that's
talk
a
about
crutch.
but then we just sat for hours.
Yes.
Not like straight, but
Right.
over the course of several weeks, I think,
Yeah,
or even months.
during a summer.
We just worked together on what kind of art styles you wanted to do in
Mhm.
each of the grade levels, and then I kind of took a look at that. How can we line that up with certain tribal nations, certain traditions?
Mhm.
How can we incorporate different things into it and teach about Native American people rather than general people, but more
Mhm.
specific, a diversity. We have a diversity
Mhm.
amongst our curriculum, and then create a curriculum for K through
Fifth.
5.
Yep, K through 5th grade. So we wrote a lesson for each grade, and it's really cool because it kind of goes all over our country, really pulling out
Mhm.
different tribes and different traditions from all of those places to give a really nice understanding and overall view of like how we actually have lots and lots of tribes within our country. So
And then also throughout time.
yes.
So one of the important things that I like to do, and I would highly recommend for you to do in your classrooms, no matter what you teach, is not focus on the past. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in the past, but it gives the idea that we're not here anymore,
Mhm.
and it's really important for students to connect that we are still here. Because I actually have had college students who have said, I didn't even know you existed anymore, and I'm like, whoo, where have you been and what school did you go to? So we had a blend of traditional art,
Mhm.
but then contemporary art and
Yep.
contemporary artists
Yes.
as well. And thinking about how students can connect, not replicate, so to speak,
Right.
but how to put their own personal connection in with it, even if they're
Mhm.
not native, which I think is really important too
Right.
in the work we did.
Right, and that's all about too, just making it more meaningful for the students instead of just doing a cookie cutter version
Mhm.
of whatever was done,
Mhm.
traditionally, which is never the best solution.
Right.
So we had a couple questions that come to us yesterday in regards to teaching and words that are frequently used, and one of the questions was how to address Native American in the classroom. Is it Native American? Is it American Indian? What is the appropriate way to address that?
So it's so funny. It's not funny, but this is literally the most popular question I'm asked by students and teachers, because you grow up in different ways. You grew up hearing different things, and so in all classrooms that I've ever taught in, K-12 and then also at the university, this is what we start out with. Doesn't matter what I'm there to talk about, we talk about this question. And I always ask, how many have heard of American Indian or Indian, Native American? And people have all heard that. And then I ask, well, maybe I should just ask them.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most correct term to use between, I'm not going to put Indian in there because that's one that kind of has gone away just because we do have people, a large population from India.
Right.
So it's not
It
usually
can get
used.
very confusing.
But what do you think is the most popular or most accepted word to use, either American Indian or Native American?
So
If
we'll
anyone
give you
wants to.
a couple seconds to do that. And while we're
Couple
waiting for, like a
2
minute.
seconds.
While we're waiting for your responses, we can talk about some of the lessons that we developed.
Yeah.
Because I want to share my personal favorite lesson is the 5th grade lesson. It's the 4th grade lesson, but now I teach it with 5th grade
Okay.
because I found it fit better in the curriculum, where we talk about James Luna?
Luna, yep.
A lot, and we talk about really creating an identity and what an identity is. So we do James Luna, we do Fritz Shoulder, which is also a contemporary Native American artist, and they're both very different, but they pull from very different things, which is really cool because Fritz Shoulder, I think his dad's Native?
Yeah, he grew up, it's interesting because he doesn't designate himself as
Right.
Native because he grew up in Minneapolis area. So he didn't grow up like on a reservation in a community, and that is a huge thing with Native identity. So if you ever even have Native students in your class, don't assume they know their background because oftentimes they're probably not coming from their community, or if they did, they might not want to talk about their experiences. But since he grew up in the cities, he is like, I'm not really native, because his family was from California, if I remember correctly. And so he never considered himself a native artist,
Right.
but he was a native artist.
Right.
So it's one
It
of
kind
those
of was
really
like
interesting
when
things to
people
talk
found
about.
out he was, and then everyone would just kind of clumped him into
Yep.
this category. And that was the conversation that we had in 5th grade. Like, if you are a football player and you're an artist, then do you want everyone to assume that you're a football playing artist? You know, or do you
Yeah.
want to separate the two? So that was also a really interesting conversation. But
And
yeah.
they put him in a box then too about what his art should look like.
Yes.
So, because
Right.
that is a big issue of what is Native American art. I mean, that's still being debated in the art community, and whether it belongs in a fine art museum or more of that kind of natural history museum.
Right.
And that becomes really problematic as well. So he was kind of trying to avoid that, and then he ended up throwing into
Yeah.
it anyway. And then he used his art though, the style of his art, which I cannot remember what kind.
Well, see, what's interesting, because his other parent is like German, from Germany,
Yes.
and his style really reflects Fauvism quite
Yes.
a bit. So that's why I think it's really interesting, is like his style reflects the German heritage, not necessarily the native heritage, but.
But then some of the pictures that he did do ended up being more activism type piece of work and social justice. So he started bringing that more into, which
Yeah.
is a really neat thing to look at identity with
It really
as well.
is, yes.
So I'm seeing a lot of Native American, or I grew up using Native American. Our assistant here was giving us words saying, they said Native American. And that is the most commonly thought of one today. So it goes by kind of generations. So my grandpa, who is still alive, he's not that ancient, but he's old. He still uses Indian. Because
So does my grandpa.
it's funny but that was the accepted term
Yep.
at the time.
Right.
I work for the American Indian Studies program. Most academic programs are called American Indian Studies program because our discipline was literally created under that accepted terminology at the time. So Vine Deloria Jr. created American Indian Studies as an academic discipline, so we've kind of kept that. And then Native American is much more recent. So that one people have kind of taken the Indian completely out of. It's amazing how many people don't know where Indian comes from. It's Columbus, thought he was in India. Oh, they must be Indians. So lesson learned, ask people first who they are. And now we're stuck with it. And then, so that's an incorrect term. American Indian is always weird too because it wasn't America. So we're kind of that's a very colonized way to look at designating people too, is there's a power aspect to that of, well, you're Indian, but you're in America, so you're American Indian. It's like, okay, those are both terms that didn't make sense. So the Native American came along to kind of separate that Indian part out. But that's got a problem to it too, is, because I always ask students or faculty, staff, teachers saying, okay, if you were born in America, aren't you native to America? And that has been an argument of, well, I'm Native American because I was born here, and it's like, oh. So they're all really problematic terms. The best thing you can possibly do is, American Indian, Native American are pretty much interchangeable. I use them interchangeably all the time, but they're all really generic terms. So when you think about using that term, you're using it to describe over 700 different tribal nations, and each of almost every single one of those has a different culture. So it's saying you have this one term that describes everybody. So it's like that term, you could think of it as European. Someone will say, oh, they're European. Well, what does that mean? Because if you're German, you're European. If you're Irish, you're European. Those are very different cultures.
Yes.
So you would never really do that with those cultures. So for Native folks here, Indigenous has been used a lot, Indigenous peoples. That can be used worldwide though. So there are Indigenous peoples everywhere. In Canada, they use First Nations. It's never caught on down here. I wish it would, because it makes more sense. It's the First Nations who were here.
Right.
But Indigenous peoples being used for a lot of my younger students use that. They're like, I'm Indigenous, or Indigenous pride type of stuff, which it's great. They're kind of reclaiming it in a different way. But I always recommend that if you're going to use it in a classroom and you're specific to a tribal nation, use the tribal nation's name. So as I mentioned, I'm an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. So are you going to know that I'm Ho-Chunk when I meet you? Well, most people don't even know I'm Native. So they're just like, oh, very confused. So I prefer to go by my tribal affiliation. So the best thing to do is just ask somebody, what do you prefer? And whether it's Native American, American Native. My mom prefers Native American. I can go with any of them because they're all kind of generalized terms. So I think that's probably one advice that I give you too, is that when you're teaching about it in your classroom and very specific with the lessons we created, they're very specific tribal nations.
Yes.
Or if it's more of a category, I'm trying to think, when we did the doll, we have a lesson on making dolls, faceless dolls. We talk about dolls from different tribal nations and give examples of this is what they look like, this is what they were used for. So tribal nation specific when you're doing curriculum and not lumping everybody in the same group.
Yes,
too.
definitely. Yeah, and I think that one lesson was a really nice way for students to see, oh, like they're not all the same people. So yeah.
Which is, it's cool though.
It is,
because so often we tend to forget, like, we think they're all stereotyped in a certain way. They all live in teepees, they all ride horses, they all hunt buffalo. Well, that's plains, hands down. Same with like clothing even. Traditional clothing, headdresses are the second most culturally appropriated Native American object. So not all tribes had headdresses, and that's definitely something that you would not make in your classroom. Because that is something that's very sacred. So understanding the difference between sacred items that you can or you cannot replicate in your classroom and more secular type of things that you can do within art as well.
And when I try to explain to people, because they're like, well, what do you mean by sacred? And like when I'm trying to show them like how offensive it can be, I always say, well, think if you were like Catholic.
Yeah.
And if you took something very, very traditional within that church into the classroom, but did something totally inappropriate with it, it's the same idea, same concept when you're doing things like that. So.
And with the headdress, what makes sense for students too is because they've had so much experience with it. Is I also grew up in a very military family, and so. A headdress is very similar to like medals of honor that somebody would earn during either a war or commendation for something. So you wouldn't just wear that. Like, oh, I'm going to stick a purple heart on because it's cool and it matches my outfit today. You would never do that. That is the same thing with a headdress as well. You have to earn that, and that's something that's respected. So understanding even what these items are is really helpful in determining whether it is sacred or something that can be shared amongst people.
So when it's something that someone has to earn, that would definitely be not acceptable thing to use in the classroom. What are some other things too that we could share with them?
One would be ceremonial type things, because a lot of ceremonies can include items or different things that from the outside world would look artistic. One thing that comes to mind is sand paintings, so Navajo sand paintings. They're beautiful, they're gorgeous, but they are used for a very specific ceremony, and those ceremonies tend to have to do with healing. And so very similar to, we just had the, oh my gosh, at the university we just had some sand art done. I'm trying to remember who did it. I want to say it was the Tibetan monks came in and did it. And it was really interesting to see because they worked all week on us. I mean, very meticulous. And then they wiped it all away at the end. And, you know, people were panicked. They're like, why would you do something like that? And it's because it's not meant to be permanent. It's there for a particular reason. That's the same thing with the sand paintings as well. Is they're done for a healing, typically, ceremony. And it's not for the outside world to use, but it's also not meant to be permanent. Otherwise, that person cannot heal. So I actually did have an art teacher approach me several years ago who came up to me after I was presenting at the museum. I was doing something up there, and she said, oh, can you give me a great resource on Navajo sand paintings? Because I want to do them in my classroom. And I, took a little breath and was like, well, you can't. And I was very, whenever I try to talk with teachers, I'm not like, don't do that, you're a terrible teacher. Because I don't want you to feel bad because you didn't know.
Right, or scare them away from not teaching anything.
So I explained, like I just did, it's not meant to be used in a classroom. So I'm not going to give you those resources. And she just said, that's fine, I'll find somebody else who will. And that was really frustrating because here I took the time to try to educate her on why you shouldn't be doing this, and she just didn't care. So if someone tells you that they are offended or you shouldn't be doing it, definitely, look into it and just take that really seriously, because we wouldn't just say it for the fun of it. Like, no, don't do that because I don't want you to do it. But there's usually a reason why we don't want you to do it as well. But that's the nice thing, is I'd rather talk you through it so that way you're comfortable and go, okay, I'm not going to do that. And then when you go out to a place too and maybe see it in someone else's school, you can kind of pull them aside and be like, I know from this experience that we shouldn't be doing this. I could be happy to connect you with somebody. It's just a way for us to learn from each other, and just to make it more comfortable, because I want stuff in classrooms. I want people to know who we are, but we need to do it in a really good way as well.
And an appropriate way to include and to teach about sand painting is there's a lot of really great contemporary artists that are using sand in their artwork right now. We just did a project a couple of years ago with a contemporary artist, and we also looked at cultures around the world that use art, that were using sand traditionally, and how they were using it, because it's kind of neat to see how that's evolved and how artists have taken these ideas, these concepts, and made it their own. So, and that's what a lot of the lessons we created were kind of like, look at how they do it. Now, what can you do being inspired by these artists?
Yeah, and looking at how stuff has changed.
Right.
Because there are a lot of Native folks who use traditional art forms, but have changed it in a way to commercialize it. So they've managed to take something that was very traditional, and then make it their own. So again, that identity piece, that individuality, but then how can we expand that? How can other people have access to that art? So pottery is one of them. That pottery's evolved immensely with technique and resources. You've got, I think it's Navajo folks who are doing horsehair pottery, which is the coolest thing on the planet. So they use horsehair to wrap into their pots before they're fired, and then the hair burns off and leaves black streaks throughout. Cool. It is the most gorgeous stuff on the planet, and
everyone should go check that out.
Go check that out. It's very cool, but that was something they were not doing pre-contact. It didn't make sense because you weren't taking the time to do something like that unless it was for a ceremonial purpose.
Right.
But now they're using techniques to say, hey, people like this, people will buy this, and I can make a living off my art. Yeah. So even talking through that journey is really cool with students too.
That's very interesting. Very cool. Yeah, we and another way to do that is to bring actual Native artists into your classroom. And I know a lot of tribes do offer grant programs. I don't know if Ho-Chunk does.
I don't think we have one set up yet.
Okay. I know, like in Wisconsin, the Oneida Nations, and I think they are also located over in New York.
There's a group, another reservation in New York.
Yeah.
As well.
They offer a really good grant program, and we were able to bring an Oneida pottery artist into our classroom a couple years ago, and that was an amazing experience, and the students really, really loved it. Worked K through 5th grade with all of the kids, and she also was an trained opera singer, so she sang in traditional Oneida to the kids, but like opera, so it was amazing. It was beautiful. So one of the you feel comfortable with that question? We were just talking about. You guys comfortable with?
I'm not sure even what question we were addressing.
To address Native American in the classroom. Is it Native American? Is it American Indian? Does that sound good? Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
It's usually frustrating for people because they want an answer.
Yes.
I just want to be told this is the right thing to use.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's just not. There's not a right way, but it's just being respectful. If you have a student in class who's like, I don't like American Indian being used, then say, okay, then we'll use Native American, or what do you prefer?
Yeah.
Just being open to that as well.
Yeah. I know, I was going to say something in that regards. But I mean, considering we're art teachers, though, we're usually, there's no right answer to anything in art either. So, like,
That's
that
true.
I feel like we're more comfortable with, like, knowing and being like, okay, yeah, we got it, yeah.
And I think we use it very rarely. I think we use Native American throughout most of our projects because we're talking tribally specific, too.
Right.
So, keeping that in mind, too, is just, if you can go down to tribal specific, do that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, whatever you're comfortable with as well.
Right. Yes. All right. So we had a question is, do you want to do that one first or the one below it first?
I could kind of do them together.
Okay.
So thinking about terminology, sorry,
Yeah.
it just
No,
bumps
you're good, you're
us
good.
right in there. Some more terminology, and that's really come up a lot. The two words that I hear most frequently, well, let's do the first one because that's
Okay.
kind of older.
Yeah. It was
Other
like
words-
so last summer.
So let's, and it's trending. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Savage and tribe are really trending as words. So I know a couple years ago, savage was huge, and I
Mhm.
still hear students use it. K-12 students, college students, that was really savage, and I'm like, I don't even get that, you know. And I'm old, so I was just like, this is the weirdest word to use. Ooh, yeah.
Yes.
They like First Nations.
Miss
Use
G
First
likes
Nations.
First Nations.
Go
Yes.
with First Nations. We'll start a trend.
Yeah,
The art teachers can
yes.
start the trend.
I like it. Let's make it happen.
So savage it's one of those things that just started being used in media and all over the place. And for most people, they wouldn't even think about it. You know, it's like, it's the word savage, big deal. But for Native folks, that term has been used to dehumanize us throughout history. So we have a history with it, and knowing that some of these words do have a significant history that can be very damaging. Because in fact, my son came home after basketball. He had heard it at basketball before. And he's like, yeah, and he's like, it just makes me feel really uncomfortable, and I don't like hearing it, and I don't know what to do. And it's hard, you know, he was, I think, in 3rd grade at the time. So it's like, how do you explain to other 3rd grade boys who are just using it because it's cool, that it's not really acceptable? So that's a conversation you can have, though, in your classrooms of, you know, we don't use that word. Try not to encourage it, I would say. I think it's fading, honestly. It's
Yeah.
one of those words that was like trending, and now I don't hear it as much. But know the history behind a lot of the words that are used.
So, can you give us like a short history of the savage and why? Like when we explain it to our students, if we hear our students say it, and I want to be specific and be like, this is why we shouldn't say that, because I feel like the more information we can give our students, the more
Absolutely.
aware they become of the word choices they're making.
Yeah. So savage was really used to designate us as lesser beings. And so when Europeans, see, I'm going to use Europeans here, started coming over to what we know now as North America, they came in with this mentality of, we're allowed to take over these people's lands because they're savage, because they're pagan. So because of Doctrine of Discovery, Manifest Destiny, they said, well, you're savage, and therefore we can take your land. So literally that has been what has happened, was we were seen as lesser human beings, not even human beings at all at times. I mean, we have documentation in our history of some of our first presidents saying they're not humans. And it's just like, wow, that is really crazy. So explaining the history of that was used to designate people as lesser humans, and not being treated equal and being allowed to take over someone's land, gives that word a very different background, instead of that just means it's really cool.
Right, and like that, when people started using that, I was like, that's an
I didn't get
extreme
it.
insult. Like, why would you?
Right.
I was like, that's a horrible thing to say to someone. So
Right.
I was also very confused on the whole trend of that as well. Miss G says she sees it a lot in stickers and gifs, and that's where I think I
Yeah.
saw a lot of it being used as well.
Absolutely. So just knowing that there is a history to a lot of this, and that's something that you can have a conversation, I think, really good with students.
Yeah.
Is little kids understand it's not okay to treat somebody not nice.
Right.
I mean, adults could use that too sometimes, but you've got a lot of little kids understand that and just say, that was used to make Jimmy over there feel like a lesser person, and
Yeah.
is that fair? Than to take his stuff because he's savage. There's ways to put these into context that they can understand and see it, going, oh, maybe I shouldn't use that word anymore. It's really weird. And so, yeah, I was just gonna say, with savages, and it's really interesting because that song that it's used in, you've got them calling savage back and forth between the colonists and the Indians as well.
Yes.
So it was really interesting to see that. And we were just talking a little bit before this. My son and my partner are actually in Peter Pan, ironically, right, in a play, and that word is used within the play, and it's meant to make the other people seem like lesser people or wild people, and to give that idea of that person is not really a human being is, it's pretty upsetting. But then stuff like this starts to trend, and people don't really think about the history behind the words anymore. And I think the same, the more commonly used one now is tribe. We're seeing that everywhere, and it was really interesting because Tasha just, what was that, last week or something,
Yeah.
you're like, hey, you were probably, I don't know, the 10th person I've had that conversation with in like the last 3 months was, what's the deal with this word? Because I started hearing it too, and it's just like, oh, I found my tribe. I'm like, were they lost? Like, I was very confused.
Right.
Like, what do you mean you found your tribe? It made it sound like I'm native. I found a way to be native, or like as Avatar, I can plug in the tree and I'm with my tribe. And I was like, this is the weirdest concept to me. And I would hear these people. It's like, and I get it. You're finding your people,
Right.
is what it is. And I was just like, for us, that word tribe means something much more. Because as a people, we're we're unique in a lot of ways, but as Indigenous people, we have different political rights as well in this country. So we are seen as sovereign nations, so independent nations. In fact, we just elected a new president a couple weeks ago, who happens to be a friend of mine, which is really cool.
That is super cool.
So I know the president of the Ho-Chunk Nation, but that means something to us. So when we hear tribe, we hear tribal nation. We hear a government. So we do have a government. So yeah, we have a president, a vice president, we have legislators who represent us, we vote on everything too. So hearing someone just casually say, I got my tribe of girls, and I'm like, okay, where's your constitution? How do you elect people? It's a very different term for us. And to hear it used very casually, once again, kind of very in a similar way as savage. It doesn't have that negative, dehumanizing aspect, but it's an appropriating aspect that's kind of says your culture is not important and your government isn't important. So we're gonna just say, oh, I have my tribe of girls, or I've got my tribe of peeps over here. Without really thinking that for us, that means so much more.
Yeah.
And it's a legal aspect, there's a political. So I'm a dual citizen, actually, of my tribal nation as well as the United States, because we are a tribe. So we're trying to actually move more towards saying tribal nation to give it more of, because when you hear tribe, you think, okay, this group of folks hanging out over here, or some group of people in the Amazon, very old or ancient type terminology. Whereas when you hear nation, then when you hear a nation, you're like, oh, that's like a government, or there's laws, there's rules. So we're trying to change that within our own communities, but tribe's just easier to say.
So who started giving the nations labeling as tribe? Was it was it a governmental system that gave them that title? Okay.
Yeah, so when colonists started coming over, it was a way to designate us as a group, basically. So same way it's being used now in popular circles of a group of people with a common culture. That's really what a tribe is.
Right.
So that's how it started getting used here, was designating these groups of people who they couldn't really understand.
Right.
But they knew they had to deal with us because we were sovereign nations. So that's where they started calling us tribes. And, to have a common term was really benefit because we couldn't just say we're Ho-Chunk people. And then it's like, okay, what we do. So it had to be uniform for the federal government when they started taking things over. So a treaty with a tribe, because that designated that nation status. So tribe was really a nation status in the beginning, but over history, that word has just become, it's a tribe. So as a group of common people, whereas for us it's something much more. So I hope that makes sense.
So are we the only country that uses that terminology, tribe, or is there?
There's
There's
other countries that use tribe, but not to refer it as nations,
Okay.
but as a group of folks of the same culture. But it's a culture, not like we have common things like we
both like
to go to
AC/DC.
Yeah, sure. So we're gonna have the AC/DC tribe. It's not something like that. It's literally because culture is a way of life. It's not just hey,
Yes.
we
well,
both
and
like
it's
emojis or something.
Years and years of traditions that have evolved
Right.
over time.
And mannerisms, values.
Yes.
So that's really what culture is. So a tribe was meant to designate these differences between these cultures. So you still hear like, oh, there's this tribe in the Amazon.
Right.
And in fact, recently there was, and now I'm forgetting where it was, but someone endangered actually a tribe on an island because he decided that it was important for him to bring God to them, and it's illegal for anybody to go to the island because they have never had contact before, and so they would constantly refer to them as a tribe. So don't do that, but because he actually also died, they shot him. So it is still there's still cultures out there who have those traditions intact, and they are still designated like as a tribe or as a group of people too.
All right, interesting. So another question that we get asked frequently is how do you go about having an appropriate Native American art lesson? So what's the correct path to go on to make sure you're doing everything appropriately?
So the first big thing that I tell any teacher, whether they're an art teacher, social studies, English, I don't even know who else I've worked with, is have a meaning to your lesson. Know what your lesson is there to teach. If you're just sticking Native people in there because it's neat or it's easy or which
You
it
saw it
isn't
on
easy.
Pinterest?
You saw it on Pinterest. Oh goodness, that was the scariest thing. I think that was one of the first things you told me when we started working together was don't look on Pinterest. And so I looked on Pinterest because I was like, I need to know what I'm up against here, and I was like, whoa! It was the scariest thing in the world. And there's people out there who are sharing things on Pinterest that I'm like, ooh, you can't do that. That's we cannot make totem poles out of cereal boxes or they were out of oatmeal, paper towel rolls,
Probably,
and
Pringles
making.
cans.
Oh my goodness, I haven't seen that one, but I'm sure it's out there. I kind of want to look now. And it was really scary to see just let's create something because it's cool and not talk about it, which is really problematic too. It's like, oh, I'm going to create this popsicle teepee. Okay, we created a popsicle teepee because it was neat to do, and we had lots of popsicles left. But really finding out what is it that you want to focus on. And I think that was a lot of our conversation was there are certain things in your curriculum, so standards, line it up with your standards. So there were certain standards, and I don't know what kids are capable of at what levels. It's like I give my kids scissors all the time. Probably not a good idea. But, it was, and my daughter just gave me an evil look. She's 14. She can handle scissors. It was helpful to see what was in the standards that you were looking at. How are we teaching this, or what do we want to teach about this? Because we did, I think it is the first grade one with the line art? With the story, the Raven Steals
Coast.
the Light.
Northeast Coast.
Northwest Coast.
Northwest Coast, yes.
Form thinking about that form line tradition and knowing that the Northwest Coast has this beautiful tradition and very distinguished stories that go with it. And thinking then, okay, how can we incorporate that into this? So our lesson actually looks at, let's read the story, ideally without
Images.
images.
And that was another thing that we got into too was what books are appropriate to use. Like there's a lot of traditional stories told, native stories told, but that aren't written by actual people of that tribe where the story originated.
Right, and that's that was a big thing when we were working on these projects too, is there's a lot of great resources out there. So if you're going to do Native American content, get Native American authors, get Native American resources. They're out there, and there's a ton of them, and they're beautiful and wonderful. In fact, one of ours, I think it's the Faceless Dolls one, we even have an Ojibwa woman who had recorded some words in Ojibwa to use within the lesson. So you can hear her speak them. She was a former student of mine who was super excited to do it. She's like, that's so cool that little kids would be learning Ojibwe words that go along with the lesson. So being very specific about your resources, being specific to tribal nations. Don't make students think all tribes do like line art.
Right.
Or all tribes make dolls. A lot of them did, but a lot of them didn't because they didn't have the resources. So bringing in that specific tribal nation, bringing in their culture, their history, the environment has a big impact on art. So what were the materials used? So we were, I think even in the Faceless Dolls one, we talked traditionally what they would use, but then our projects were in felt. And then that was actually used in a contemporary exhibit over in the cities. So again, talking about how these can evolve. So we do have these lessons available, I think, still online. Right?
I believe so. Do you have a link to them?
I think I just Google it a lot of times.
Okay. I haven't been able to upload it on my website because it's too big of a file, but I just flipped it over to a new website so I can see if I can download it. So we wrote this lesson, or this curriculum, how many years ago?
Oh my gosh.
5 years ago?
I think it's 7. I think it's 7.
Yeah, you're probably right. 7 years ago. So a lot of the lessons, there's some I still teach and some that I have gotten away from, but there's some years that I'm like, oh, I want to try to pull this in again. So they're all lessons that I have taught in my classroom, but I'm not necessarily going to be teaching them every year. So just know that they were practiced in my room, but not necessarily. And sometimes they'll do with like different grades too. So yeah.
And a lot of them can, I mean, they're K through 5. But they can be adapted to older students,
definitely.
Especially some of the stuff about identity, stereotypes. Even the storytelling one could be really adapted to older students too. And a lot of the resources that we used either came from just research I did, but also there are a lot of great art resources out there already. So the James Luna and the Fritz Scholder information is actually from the National Museum of the American Indian. So they have art lessons, and theirs was specifically for high school students, and we adapted it for elementary school. We were able to make that work. So know that those resources are out there and that you can adapt them as well. The University of Minnesota also has fantastic art resources. So that's where our Faceless Dolls one kind of originated from, but I think they've got some beading and basketry as well. So
Sierra wants to know if we're going to archive this. So what I'm going to try to do is save this and then see if I can archive it or upload it onto Instagram TV. So if you're not able to, oh yeah, that's a thing. So if you're not able to continue, if you have other things you need to do, we'll hopefully have this provided for you on another platform so you can watch it as well. And then we will look to see if we have that curriculum available. If not, I can email me and I can send it to you, and I'll see if I can upload it onto my website as well. So we also put in for this year to present at the national conference in Minneapolis. So hopefully if we are going to do that, we'll provide that curriculum for you too if you do come to that, which would be very fun.
That would be fun. And then we can chat more too.
Yes. And maybe update the curriculum.
Yes. That would be really exciting.
Yes, it would.
And know that, because I know we have limited time and everything, and people probably don't want to spend 5 hours on Instagram tonight. I mean, or maybe you do. But, you know, Tasha has my contact information. I think I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty sure I am. I'm just not on it very well.
I'll find you and I will share you.
But know that I am definitely willing to either chat with you or come visit your classroom or look at materials or see where we can fit things into. And it's something that it's not part of my job as a professor at the university, but it's the thing I like to do the most. Besides teaching. It is a passion. I get really excited to go into classrooms and talk with students, and I think students still have a very narrow idea of who Native people are. I mean, we here in Fall Creek have a pretty limited, undiverse population. So when kids find out, you know, that my kids are Native, they're kind of thrown off. And kind of surprised. So, and at a very young age, I think it was second grade when my son was told he wasn't Native because he didn't look like he was Native. And I'm like, oh, at second grade already there's this preconceived notion of who Native people are, and that can become very problematic. So
Barcelona, Spain.
Oh, hi.
You want to go there?
Yes,
we'll both go there.
You
We'll
bet.
both come
I
visit you
will
there.
come visit you over there for sure. But yeah, I like getting the information in the classroom. So always feel free to contact me or contact Tasha, who can get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to look at anything.
She really is a plethora of information. So if you do have like a lesson that you're teaching now and you're like, I wonder if there's more content I could just squeeze into this little guy, let her know what you're doing, and she can like just throw a ton of other resources at you to give you some more ideas on how you can incorporate that into your current lessons.
Absolutely. And another thing that I kind of just want to throw out there too, and I think I mentioned it a little bit, is none of our stuff replicates exactly Native American art. We're finding different ways on how to take your own spin on it. Even with the pottery lesson that we have, it's very specific to one particular potter. So it's we're really focused, but then students are able to create something that's meaningful to them and find a way to not just, I'm going to make a Navajo pot or of course, all these random tribes that no one will ever have heard of come to mind.
Sure,
I'm trying to give an example. So, instead of replicating something, make it meaningful. So, the other one I do want to say, put out there, the most culturally appropriate item of ours are dream catchers. And
that was another question I was going to ask of you.
Everywhere. You can get them at Michael's in art kits. It's very awkward. My daughter got one for her birthday one year, and she's like, what do I do with this? This is weird. That is something that is actually very sacred and should be made in a particular way with particular resources. So, a perfectly round dream catcher is not a traditional dream catcher. We wouldn't have something like that. And knowing the traditions behind it, it's not something that we would just make with purple feathers or whatever colors you wanted to feel like making. So I would definitely avoid something like that, which people I do know make them all the time. And it's really controversial even within our communities because they're like, no, go ahead and make them. And it's like, oh, it's kind of gets uncomfortable as well because you're like, it's not something I would recommend art teachers do in their classrooms because there's so many other art projects to do, and you're just perpetuating a stereotype. And then when people hang them from their rearview mirrors or something like that, it's always awkward because you shouldn't be sleeping while you're driving your car. So, if they're used in an appropriate way, I think having them and using them is good, but I would avoid making them in a classroom for sure. Yeah.
So we have a question from Ms. G. She asks, how can we find information about nations in my state? And she lives in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, there's really no one there. That's what's frustrating is we, in Wisconsin, we have the most tribal nations east of the Mississippi River. And that's just history. That's part of history. So there are tribes in Pennsylvania. There are very few tribes left in Pennsylvania. I would highly recommend, I'm trying to think of some of the resources that, of course I can't think of, my daughter's frantically writing something now. She has an idea. That's for Wisconsin, honey. That's not going to help her in Pennsylvania. But that's awesome. It was a great resource. So, yeah, I would look at your local historical societies. Find some history background, not in textbooks, because in textbooks they can be problematic. And I'm there's a very popular tribe in there, and I'm just not thinking about. Will you Google Pennsylvania real quick? It's gonna drive me crazy.
It's okay. She's on it.
I'm thinking.
Well,
hang in there.
Figuring that one out. We did have a question about someone asked. My school has asked me to design costumes for a Native American night.
What's a Native American
I have
night?
no idea.
Native American night. So I guess, okay, kind of going back to thinking about the intent, I would want to know, what is Native American night? What does it consist of? What are you learning about? What Native Americans are you learning about? I would never dress up kids in a costume, ever. It's not, you wouldn't, I liken it to this. Would you ask kids to dress up black on Martin Luther King Day? You wouldn't do that. You should, or if people in your school are thinking about doing that, tell them that they shouldn't do that either. It's the same thing. So I would never, I've always advised my teachers never to do costumes at all for an educational thing. So something like, okay, Peter Pan, it has Indians in it. Obviously there's going to be costumes there, and it's just a matter of thinking about whether it's appropriate or it's not stereotyping type of thing. So thinking about Native American night, what is the intent of it? What would be the intent of the costumes? Are students learning anything from being in costumes? Why do they want to be dressed up in costumes? But I would never have someone dress up in a costume, because you wouldn't do that for like a civil rights event either, like everyone dress up as slaves. It's very similar to that as well. So I would have a conversation with whoever is in charge of that and say, you know, maybe this is not the right thing to do. It's not appropriate to dress up as another culture. And then kind of move forward from there.
So one thing could they do is research, you know, traditional wares, and then maybe learn the techniques that were used, and then incorporate that into maybe in their own fashion style, like their own design. Would maybe be an appropriate way to go about, like backwards way to go about
learning about what they would have traditionally worn, but then the different
techniques that they would have used to, but then
that would
having
be a
them
good way
design
to
their
do that
own
as
kind
well.
of fashion.
So getting back to Ms. G there, I haven't seen that spelled that way before, but that would be one of them. But the one I was thinking was Lenape Nation. Is really well known. It's Lenape, or Lenny Lenape, are very well known in Pennsylvania, and they have a lot. I believe they have even a cultural center with their people there too. They even have worked with the Boy Scouts, because that has been kind of problematic for us as well. So I would start with the Lenny Lenape for Pennsylvania for sure, because I know that they are a little bit bigger tribe. It's kind of neat to learn about smaller tribes or the lesser known tribes, but it's really hard to get information, especially if they're smaller or if they're dealing with a lot of other issues. They might not be able to work with you on certain things or have the resources to work with you as well.
But because they're local, maybe you'll have a better one.
Right. So I hope that was helpful.
All right, any other questions? We covered with you how to address Native American in your classroom, what's the most appropriate terminology to use, ways to go about talking about how savage and tribe aren't necessarily the best terms that you can use in your classroom, educating about the history of those was a really big, and then art projects, the best way to go about teaching Native American art projects and making sure that they're appropriate for your classroom. So hopefully that's some great information that you can walk away with today, and if you're looking for that curriculum, I will be posting on where you can get that, and if I can't figure out where to get it because it is a really, really big document, you know what I could do is maybe put it free on my TPT, my Teachers Pay Teachers.
Oh.
That would probably work. So I'll try to see if I can throw it up there for you guys as well. Hopefully we'll be presenting in the cities at the National Conference in March too. So you can check us out then if you're going to go to that as well. All right, but otherwise it was very fun. Thank you so much for joining us and educating us. You're just a plethora of knowledge, and I just enjoy sitting down and just talking with you.
It's fun. I love talking with teachers. It's one of my favorite things to do.
All right, well, thanks you guys. It was very fun having you, and feel free to shoot us any questions. I will post where you can contact Heather if you have any other questions too, maybe more personal ones that you're just very specific questions that you didn't feel comfortable sharing on here, all right? Thanks again, you guys. Have a great evening.